if you go back to, and when Wesley Clark said we're gonna invade 7 countries in 5 years, what you were talking about were the countries where those central banks were not on board to do programmable money. And their governance structures were not on board with essentially, because of Epstein, I'll call it the Rockefeller Rothschild model. There was an effort to say, okay, we're going to basically assert control of the central banks in those countries. That's my interpretation. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing so much tension around Iran is because Iran right now is the big leakage in the system.
How?
So
it's not about their nukes?
No. So, Iran's central bank counts. One of the reasons it counts is because their oil and energy is very important, including for China.
Yeah.
And that's very important in the BRICS system. What the BRICS system is trying to do is to create independent payment systems. But if you're going to come out with programmable money, with digital IDs that are interoperable globally and programmable money that controls in each jurisdiction centrally, you can't afford leakage. And so you've got way too much leakage in the system to proceed with what they're trying to do. And Iran and the BRIC nations are a sticking point. And certainly Iran's oil, feeding China gives China greater independence.
So you think that one of the motives behind toppling all these governments was the creation of the control grid we're talking about now?
Right. So if you go back, you had the wonderful Richard Werner on your show.
Yeah.
And Richard has a book called The Princes of the Yen, which is about the sort of effort to take over the Japanese central bank. And I think what you're looking at, I think part of the state of play with both Russia and Iran is how are you going to make sure that those central banks are entirely in the system?
So, yeah, that was an amazing interview. And he told the story about writing this book on the Japanese central bank. I can't imagine a more obscure topic from my non-economically minded standpoint. It'd be like writing a book on postcards from the Falkland Islands. It's just like, okay, a book on the Japanese central bank. And he said, well, actually, they suppressed it. I couldn't get it published in the United States, and you can't get a copy. And that's like checkable. So I checked it. You can't get a copy of that book. It's really hard.
I think you can order from its publisher right now.
Okay.
Right.
But, I mean, why would someone try to suppress
because
a book?
It shows you the true, it takes you right into the secret governance system, and it shows you the primary mechanism by which they implement policy.
Yeah. Well, it's always the things you're not allowed to say are probably the important things. Right. I mean, whenever they penalize you for having a thought, you're probably on the right track.
Well, it's one of the critical train tracks of control. So it's what I call the third rail. So I used to finance transit systems and train systems. So, a lot of these systems have 2 tracks that the wheels go on, and then they have a third rail that the power line runs on. And You get a trim trap that flips over and sucks the energy from the third rail. So a lot of the things that really operate the third rail are very invisible. And for example, in central banking, to talk about tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 capital at the BIS and the banks, there's nothing more boring. It's designed to absolutely...
I just fell asleep in the middle of that sentence.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. Right.
Is it boring by design?
The way you're taught to talk about it is boring by design. It's like the mechanisms of the legal system. If you look at the mechanisms of civil procedure or criminal procedure, it can, and you get into the weeds on it, it can be very boring unless you understand the application, and that can make it very interesting. But the capital, most people don't understand the capital's, sort of regulatory system. And yeah, it can get very, very boring.
Can you just, for people who haven't seen your previous talk, explain what the control grid is, what it looks like, and what it means?
So the control grid is a process or an infrastructure that allows digital technology to be used to assert phenomenal surveillance and control of people.
Yes.
And at the very heart of it is what I call programmable money. So it's money that is no longer just a currency. It's money that comes with a set of rules that can be surveilled and enforced. So imagine back in the pandemic, if your money, if I said, okay, you've got a lockdown and your money won't work if you leave your house. You can't buy gas in your car because your money is programmed with AI and software to enforce a whole set of centralized rules. And programmable money allows the bankers who've been running monetary policy to now control fiscal policy and essentially replace legislatures and executive branch by making and enforcing the rules through the money. Now that requires a large infrastructure of surveillance. So you need digital IDs, and then you need the hardware locally and globally to do the surveillance and implementation. So for example, if you look at the local hardware, and now people are seeing it, now that it's material, they're beginning to see it snap into place. So I don't know if you know flock cameras, but there are many communities across the United States that are entering into contracts paid by the taxpayers to put up cameras all around their neighborhood that track license plates and keep that data and share it with a variety of people. Or you have the FCC is trying to overrule local controls on cell towers so they can literally put cell towers every 400 to 700 feet so that they can have the kind of invasive surveillance you need. Or you have satellites now that can literally beam in Wi-Fi so that whether you have Wi-Fi in your home or not, they can start to track you. And all those systems put you in what I call the panopticon. So we saw in the Middle East with the first war with Iran, we saw 11 leaders out of 12 sort of top leaders in science and government assassinated because they're literally tracking everyone, and they can identify them and track them, and then you have invisible weaponry that can then take them out or, can identify missile strikes. So
let me ask you about, so you're talking about the 12-day war against Iran in June of 2025.
Correct.
We were led to believe, just as newspaper readers or news consumers, that those 11 Iranian officials were targeted with human intelligence, that Israel had spies inside of Iran, but you're saying that was done digitally.
I would assume that that's probably true, because you always want to get human confirmation of what the systems are telling you. It's always better if you have both. But we are now moving into building out the kind of surveillance systems that can literally track, identify, and integrate with not only our existing weaponry, but ultimately autonomous weaponry. So let me step back. You've got three parts to the control grid. One is the local hardware and infrastructure, and that includes the data centers. Because the
data, I thought those were for AI.
They are. Because if you look at what it takes to apply the equivalent of a social credit system to people's money, so the social credit system I apply to you is different than the one I apply to me. And if you look at the data I need to track you and test whether or not you're following the rules I've given you and enforce those rules, it's an explosive amount of data, particularly because you're looking not just at financial control, but spatial control. So what is AI good at, Tucker? AI is
spatial control, movement control?
Yeah, so turn off the car. So Congressman Massey is trying to kill the kill switch in your car. That's because spatial control means I can turn off your car, or I can set it so your money won't work more than a mile from your home or a 15-minute city. So you're not allowed to leave your 15-minute city, and your transportation and your money won't work outside of that area. So let me step back. So what is AI good at? AI is very good at tracking things that can be expressed mathematically. And financial transactions and spatial movement can be expressed mathematically. And so what the AI centers are for primarily is to build that digital control grid and to manage that data. So, and now it can be used for many other purposes too. So it's not just going to be used for control. But to me, that's the primary purpose. And that, if you look at the cameras, if you look at the cell towers, if you look at the satellites, and then the AI, the data centers, those are all component pieces of the local hardware. So there are three sort of pillars that I track. One is the programmable money, and that's what we at Solari are trying to stop. The second is the digital ID, because you need digital ID systems that are interoperable globally, and then the local hardware. And those are sort of the three pillars. And what's interesting is there's phenomenal development of all three. We have a commentary at Solari where we track, it's called the Fast Approaching Digital Control Grid, and every week we update all the things that are being done to build those three pillars and have them integrate with each other. And ever since the inauguration, it's been moving very, very quickly.